Think of the people you interact with every day. Would you want to spend a day in a canoe with them? This show is about hearing stories from exceptional people that can help jumpstart and inspire you to create the life you want. One filled with wealth, wisdom, meaning, and purpose. And that starts with surrounding yourself with the right people. And the people I'm interviewing, I believe you'd want to spend a day with in a canoe. I'm your host, Nathan Mercereau. Well, I'm delighted today to welcome Jack Uldrich to Day in a Canoe podcast. Jack is a well-recognized global futurist, speaker, and author of 11 books. And he's a frequent speaker on technology, change management, and leadership, and has addressed hundreds of corporations, associations, not-for-profit organizations on 5 continents. So, Jack, you definitely have covered a lot of ground. Jack regularly makes TV appearances on Science Channel's Futuriscape program and the Discovery Channel show Inside Out, and is a frequent guest on major media outlets, including CNN, CNBC, and National Public Radio. Jack is a former Naval Intelligence Officer and Defense Department official, and has his most recent book, Foresight 2020, A Futurist Explores the Trends Transforming Tomorrow, and his forthcoming book, Business as Unusual, How to Future-Proof Yourself Against Tomorrow's Transformational Trends Today. So, Jack, welcome. And for listeners of Day in a Canoe, you have a really interesting background, and love to hear kind of your career evolution, and then we'll get into some of the current things that are on your mind around trends.
Yeah, well, thanks, Nathan. It's a pleasure to be here. My background, a lot of people always want to know, well, how does one become a futurist? And just so you know, there is no sort of formal credentialing process. Anyone can sort of call themselves a futurist, and then I allow the commercial marketplace to determine who's good, who's bad. But in my case, my path was this. Right after I graduated from university, I graduated from Drake University in Iowa. I went into the Navy and served as an intelligence officer for 3 years, active duty, got out, went to graduate school for strategic planning, and then I went to Washington, D.C. I worked as a civilian. I worked as a policy analyst in Washington, D.C. and for a year in NATO in Brussels. But I soon discovered that working for the Defense Department was a huge bureaucracy like any other, and it just wasn't a good fit for me. And so I returned to my home state of Minnesota. I unsuccessfully ran for Congress, but in that bid, I met a most unusual fellow. He had me on his radio program, but 2 years later, he was governor of Minnesota, and that was Jesse Ventura. So I served as the director of the Office of Strategic and Long-Range Planning in the state of Minnesota for 4 years under Governor Ventura. But it was at the end of that job, and the mission of that job was to look out to the future and prepare policymakers and the public for what was coming next. But from that experience, I wrote my first book on emerging technology. It was on nanotechnology, but I soon discovered that you could make a career writing and speaking about future trends. And so really that's what I've been doing for the last 20 years. But the evolution of my books has changed. I'm happy to sort of get into that as well, because I've evolved as a futurist, I think.
And did you have that futurist seed always planted in you, or was it just as you kind of explored other avenues and didn't find them as kind of focused or energizing for you that led you to focus on the
yeah, that's a really good question. I think that I always have had that futuristic seed. And I'll just go back and tell you, when I was running for Congress, this was in 1996, and just to show you sort of how naive I was then concerned about the federal government's then $4 trillion national debt. But I felt that was very unequitable to future generations. So in that aspect, I was always sort of looking out towards the future and recognizing that we have to make difficult decisions and sacrifices today in order to create a better future. But where that futuristic seed really came from, I can't quite say, but it always has been there.
In our industry with financial planning and wealth management, we find that we're always trying to plan for the future, but there's so many changes that go on in the current moment that oftentimes it's hard to discern like what's relevant today and how do I plan for tomorrow? And I know for a lot of us, we might not even want to think about the future in the sense that there's so many things out of our control, or who can predict what's around the corner when we live in such a ever-changing world. How do you speak to people about, I guess, their paradigm or their viewpoint around thinking about the future?
Yeah, I think well, one of the things that I have had to unlearn as a futurist and a strategic planner is this idea that I do believe that there's great merit in thinking deeply about the future, but if I've learned one thing, it is this element of humility, and that nobody can, in fact, predict the future. You can try and think about it as deeply as you can, but there will always be unexpected things that you simply weren't aware of. And so then the question becomes, okay, well, if that isn't as helpful, just thinking about the future, what has to replace it? And I would argue strategic experimentation. So none of us fully know what is going to work in the future, and we have to get more comfortable with experimentations, with pilot projects. And that means that we have to get a lot more comfortable with risk and uncertainty. And I think if I've learned anything, it is that uncertainty is simply a principle of the future. You cannot wish it, you cannot will it away. And so it is incumbent upon leaders and people in my position to help people get more comfortable with uncertainty. Because I think once you can relax into the uncertainty, then you can lift your heads up and say, okay, what are the real threats? What might disrupt my business? But also, what are the immense opportunities of the future? But because so many people are afraid of uncertainty, that fear locks them in, and that keeps them from embracing the immense possibility of the future.
In your book, you talk about unlearning. So that's a really interesting point of view. Can you unpack that more as to
Yeah.
what that means?
So frequently, clients would have me back to speak at their event, and I would often ask them, "Well, what did you do with the information that I provided you the first time I was there?" And this is when I was just focused on future trends. And the honest answer, Nathan, was frequently, "Well, we didn't do too much with it, Jack." And I thought, look, that's not just my client's problem; that's my problem. I'm not somehow serving them. And so as I thought about it, frequently what I discovered is people can understand what is coming next. What they have a really hard time doing is letting go of what they have always known. And I came to discern that this principle of unlearning was absolutely critical, that before people can embrace the future, many times they first have to unlearn what it is they think they know about their business model, their customers, their competitors, the world of tomorrow. And I still see it a lot in my work. And I, I also just try and constantly stay open to this idea of what do I currently have to unlearn.
And do you find that people embrace that easily, or what are some practical steps to unlearning? Because last time I checked, there wasn't an unlearn button that I could press and it just
Yeah,
snapped into
I
place.
tell you, it's really, really difficult because, I mean, if all of your success is based on your past knowledge, right? To suddenly be told, oh, that information that made you so successful or your business so successful is now potentially obsolete is not a welcomed message. I mean, people's success, their status, their prestige is all often based on that old knowledge. And so, to me, the most critical element around unlearning is this idea of humility. And that then leads us into questions, the power of questions. And so, I think if we want to unlearn, we have to become better at asking better, deeper, more profound questions. And I read a book a couple of years ago called A More Beautiful Question, and this has always stuck with me. Do you know what the peak question asking age is when people ask the most questions? Well, it's when they're 4 years old. But as soon as they go to school, they don't try and keep our kids curious. They try and drum information into their heads, and they become less and less curious. And in a world that is moving ever faster and is more and more uncertain, questions actually become a more potent and powerful currency. And so I see one of my responsibilities as a futurist is to help questions. But if you can stick with questions a little bit longer, you're going to be more open to this idea of what don't I know? What aren't I seeing? What do I have to unlearn? And so questions are a key component of unlearning.
And what are some areas that you see emerging on the trend basis that really is catching your eye as we're going into 2022 now, and say, hey, we need to have a heads up on this and start to ask some serious questions?
Boy, there are so many, but I will tell you, from my perspective, is blockchain is a technological platform that goes well beyond digital cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin and Ethereum and Litecoin and things like that. It is going to have a profound impact on the economy of the future, and the fact that it's going to facilitate so many peer-to-peer interactions, and it is going to disintermediate a lot of current professions. So that's one. The advances in artificial intelligence, fast and furious. There's a wonderful quote from the former CEO of IBM, Gina Rometty, and she said, artificial intelligence is going to transform 100% of jobs, 100% of industries, 100% of professions. It is going to touch every aspect of our life. And I think one of the really interesting and troubling aspects of artificial intelligence, it is the first technology in which humans have developed that we don't fully understand the end game. I mean, if we actually create something that is smarter than us and we can't discern how it came to its conclusions, that's a really troubling prospect. But having said that, so that's the negative side. The positive applications of artificial intelligence are absolutely astounding. There are many other trends I could spend all day talking about: gene editing technology, quantum computing, satellite technology, the Internet of Things, 3D printing, robotics. But let me say this. I think one of the fascinating aspects of the future is it's not just going to be one technology that transforms the world. It is going to be a convergence of multiple technologies. And let me just give you two examples. The historical analogy is the printing press. Gutenberg was a genius, but his genius wasn't that he invented that printing press out of thin air. His genius was he took four existing technologies. He took a wine press, movable type, ink and paper, and he converged those into a platform that transformed the world. In that same way, about 12 years ago, Uber and Lyft suddenly discerned in a world of smartphones and GPS satellite technology and cloud computing, they could fundamentally think about transportation in a radically different way. It wasn't any one technology, it was the convergence of those three. And so as I think about the future, it is going to be a world of satellites and sensors collecting massive amounts of data, uploading it to the cloud, edge computing platforms, and then we're going to sift through all of that data with algorithms and artificial intelligence, discern new insights that we're going to send back down to our smartphones, to our personal devices, and we're going to be able to do things in fundamentally different ways. And then you start throwing blockchain in there, and I think there are so many different permutations that the future can take. It's both really exciting and scary at the same time, and sort of gets back to this principle of uncertainty, of getting comfortable in this rapidly changing world.
I'm curious about your point of view on how these technologies evolve and then get into the hands of maybe some bad actors, because we're definitely in the Wild West of sorts in a number of fronts, whether it's blockchain or AI, and data is the currency of the world. So it can be a very powerful thing, but it can also be a very detrimental or damaging thing if used unwisely. How, especially from your background at the Defense Department, how do you make sure that we're self-policing ourselves along the way so that we make the most of this?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question, and I wish I had a really good answer for you. Unfortunately, I don't. What I would say this is, I think the role of government over the last half century has really shifted. 100 years ago, even 50 years ago, government was, if not the leading proponent of technological change, be it rockets, nuclear power, other things like that. But then over the last 50 years, the private sector has become ascendant, and they are developing so many new technologies that now it is government's responsibility to, and I don't use the word bureaucratic or regulation as bad. We actually need people thinking longer and harder about the flip side, the negative side of all of these technologies. If you're an entrepreneur or if you're a business, you're focused on the positive applications of that technology. And but it still has to be someone's responsibility to think about the negative side of these things. And I don't think we did a good enough job with the internet in the early days, with social media, and now with artificial intelligence and potentially blockchain and gene editing technology. All of them absolutely incredible, powerful platforms, but there is this dark side that we need to spend more time thinking about. So I think government's going to take the lead, but I don't mean to absolve the private sector and business people of their responsibility, but I would argue it goes back to just asking deeper, harder questions about the potentially negative implications of these technologies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I think it's a challenging issue, but all of us need to be attuned to it and be educated. So I'm grateful for your platform, your message, your books. You said that your viewpoint or your writing changed over time. What's that mean from your experience?
Yeah, well, I think that this idea that we have to be lifelong learners isn't a cliche, it's a reality, and we also have to be lifelong unlearners. And so I think what I'm always trying to do is grow as an individual. And you and I, before this, were just talking about the benefits of getting out in nature. And I think nature sort of teaches us, especially in the fall, that you have to let go of sort of your old leaves and then go through a period of the dark winter. But it's all essential to our growth. And so for me, I'm at the stage of my life, I'm trying to more focus on letting go of things so that I can reach that next stage of growth. And let me just tell you, I came to this through unlearning, but as I was researching the concept of unlearning, this isn't a new idea. It is throughout ancient philosophy, ancient spiritual traditions. They've always talked about this need of letting go. There are two quotes that I love. The first one comes from Lao Tzu, an ancient Chinese philosopher, who said, "To attain knowledge, add things every day." And by all means, I read a lot and I'm trying to add new things. But the second part of the quote is, "To attain wisdom, subtract things every day." And I think more of us have to focus, especially as we get older, as we're promoted, that we have to embrace our responsibility to become wiser. But to become wiser, it's actually more of a process of subtraction than it is addition. And then there's another wonderful quote. The name is Meister Eckhart, but he's an ancient Christian mystic. He said, "Only the hand that can erase can write the truth." And I love that, is that by all means we have to write, but we have to have the courage to say, you know what, I thought that was true, but it's now time for me to erase that so that I can grow into a new insight.
Jack, those are profound words that you're sharing. Thank you for taking the time today to chat with our audience of Day in a Canoe. Thank you for being part of our Outlook 2022 event, and wish you all the best in your endeavors, and look forward to maybe one day spending a literal day in a canoe with you.
Nathan, I would love that. So thank you. It's been a pleasure, and we could have talked all day.
Thanks, Jack. Thank you for listening and tuning in to Day in a Canoe. We are thrilled to have you as part of our community. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review and share it with your friends and loved ones. You can always get more information at dayinacanoe.com. We'll see you next time.